Hey, it's Brooks from the Quarantine Collective. I get pinged a lot to explain this philosophical concept or to comment on this political thing, and my challenge has always been the same. There's really no way to talk about a single part of what is a lot more complexity in the system that's going on. I'm not someone who's skilled at breaking things down into their tiniest parts. At least, I try not to be. That's kind of the goal of this series. For me, I want to try breaking things down and not worrying about the rest of the interconnectedness. I want to really focus on bits of things that I think are really important for us to get going. Bear with me as I get this sort of set up. I have a bit of a script. I have an outline that I need to keep going on because otherwise I'll keep going on forever. You remember how I am. But today, I want to talk about ressentiment. In order to really break down ressentiment properly, we need to take a second and think about how shit happens to us, how shit happens to you. You probably remember a thing or two that has happened to you in your time. Here's the problem, though. There isn't really a thing that happens to us. Instead, it's kind of two parts. There's the memory of the thing, the recording of that memory, and then there's us reacting to it in that moment. These two parts really don't make sense as being the same thing. This is really where Freud ended up coming up with his unconscious. Nietzsche as well. The work done here and the realization sort of was put in where we started to realize that we actually can't have the same stuff happen. If part of us is recording and part of us is reacting at the same time, then we have two parts. Nietzsche distinguishes two systems within the reactive apparatus: the conscious and the unconscious. The reactive unconscious is defined by mnemonic traces, by lasting imprints. It is a digestive, vegetative, and ruminative system which expresses, quote, the purely passive impossibility of escaping from the impression once it is received. Yeah, memory. Shit that happens to you sticks around. You have traces of it inside of you. You may burn your hand on a hot stove as a child, bite down on a popcorn kernel that actually was a kernel and not a soft bit, and fuck. We hold on to these traces. These become just a big ball of traces. This is what Freud called our unconscious and Nietzsche called our unconscious. This is this thing, this mnemonic space of memory, this vegetative system. Can't be all there is. After all, when you burned your hand, you didn't just remember that you were being burned. You realized it and reacted. You acted. You yanked your hand away. You stopped biting down on the kernel rather than going all the way through and cracking a tooth. On top of all that, you've probably burned your hand since, and you've probably eaten popcorn again. It can't just be that we're made of memories. There's another part of us, another reaction, a thing that reacts. This is less unconscious, more what you would probably call conscious. This is the stimuli of the world and you reacting to it, what you do in the world when stimulated. We want to hold up here and be very careful about how we use these words. We don't want to start talking about the unconscious as being purely reactive and the conscious as being purely active. In fact, when we talk about active here, we're talking about a reaction that is acted. As Deleuze writes, there are two simultaneous processes. Reaction becomes something acted because it takes conscious excitation as its object, and reaction to traces remains in the unconscious, imperceptible. This is why I actually really like Deleuze's reading of Nietzsche. It's really difficult to get underneath what Nietzsche is talking about here, and Deleuze is able to just pull that straight out. To say it kind of another way, experiences are recorded in our unconscious. They leave an imprint, one that is affective. Now, affective is probably a thing that's worth taking a second on. I'll have another video talking about it, but at a basic level, we tend to talk about emotions. We tend to confuse affective with emotions, but that's not really what it is. Affectivity is your capacity for those emotions. It's a fine line, and it's a really nuanced difference, but it's really important with what we're talking about here. This capacity is your capacity for being brought up or down, joyful or sad, angry, terrified, whatever it may be, your capacity for acting this into the world, for dealing with these things, your capacity for being affected, more or less. It's important because we're going to be talking about the force of stuff. And the affect is not the force. Not really. It's its capacity for the force. But with all this, we also have sort of our ongoing experience of life. The thing in the world, us being in it. Acting in the world, doing something in response to the direct stimulus. This doesn't quite sit in memory. This is us in the moment, you might say. So we have these two sides, and they're running parallel to each other quite often. They're running next to each other, and they're interacting, going off of each other. This is the sort of general human condition. We have the memories, and we have the momentary world. And the way these two interact kind of decides what we end up doing. The thing that gets fucked up is how these two coincide. When working well, we have memories of things. We react to them a bit emotionally. They're part in there. They're not hard-lined. They're not directly knowable, but we have these sort of ongoing responses, these affective responses. But have you ever been mad at a loved one for doing that thing, that thing for the 100th time? That thing that's super annoying to you. But you never mention anything because, God, what good would it do? You see them doing that annoying thing the 101st time. Again. Christ, don't they remember all those times? This is ressentiment. This is actually where these two sides get fucked up. We all experience it. We all see this. This is memory coming into consciousness. Memory is not supposed to leak that direction. We aren't really meant to be living in the past, not in that way. When we let ourselves react to these memories directly, we've stopped reaction from, acting, from reacting. Instead, we're reacting to memories, not the world. It's taken over, and it's done a really insidious thing to do this, because these things are ideas. These things are narratives. This reaction is really just purely emotional, and that's it. You can't do anything for a memory. You can't do anything against a memory other than talk about it. Maybe you can yell at someone on Twitter or Discord or a shitty YouTube comment. Yeah, you can probably do all those things. But this isn't really acting, not materially, and it's not acting directly into the world. It's somewhere else, reacting to something else. This is your imperfect self, for certain, that you're reacting to, an imperfect memory. No matter what you may say, how photographic your memory might be, it is imperfect. That's because these things, these memories, are traces. They're just the emotional bits, the leavings of what happened to you. You take these traces, you bring them into your conscious experience. You calcify them. You give them a very hardened, specific, concretized reality that they don't have. And then all of this you react to at once. These surface level memories with surface level understandings, they find their ways to surface. They surface in me. Safe bet they do in you too. Most interesting to talk about, though, are people who don't have the wherewithal, whether because they choose not to or they just can't introspect in a way of understanding where their drives are coming from. Conservatives are kind of the archetypical, canonical version of this. Their entire philosophy is that of memory. It's how they remember things. And again, imperfectly, they remember the affective elements, the capacity for acting in the world at best, these emotional traces that they calcify, they bring forward, and they react to that, not really the world that's in front of them. And this shit gets really, really painful for them. Their life becomes mired in reactive forces. I think, again, Deleuze kind of put it best. It is your fault if no one loves me. It is your fault I've failed in life, and also your fault if you fail in yours. Your misfortunes and mine are equally your fault. Here we rediscover the dreadful power of ressentiment. It is not content to denounce crimes and criminals. It wants sinners, people who are responsible. We can guess what the creature of ressentiment wants. He wants others to be evil. He needs others to be evil in order to be able to consider himself good. You are evil. Therefore, I am good. This isn't simply that one is moralizing and wringing their hands over the good and evil of anyone. Instead, this is born of the same interactions we saw earlier, that we talked about earlier. Nietzsche's famous for this. People love to read his works badly and come away with really, really shit takes. Beyond good and evil. Oh yes, no. This means moving to a place where we are beyond it. We don't judge. One does not moralize. We are beyond the good and the bad. Except that part where Nietzsche very specifically says, I don't mean beyond the good and the bad. No, what Nietzsche's getting at here, and what he gets at through the entirety of Beyond Good and Evil, which isn't really even a fucking, I hate all this so much. What he's getting at here is something that is actually deeper and far more complex than just some silly nihilism. He is demanding we look beyond the simplicity of good and evil, of beyond bad and good. He wants us to see these things as the simple elements, the outcome, and he wants us to know, how did we get here? He wants us to consider why. Let's take a great example. And we have a bunch of friends. They've decided to order a pizza. It's a great weekend. They get together. A bunch of them do. They do this every weekend. They get a pizza. They eat. Now, at the end of it, really only 2 people want a piece of pizza, but they don't know that. We have one. Let's call him Mr. Saint. Let's call the other Mr. Animal. Mr. Saint offers Mr. Animal, oh, you're hungry. Why don't you take the last slice? Mr. Animal happily does, takes it and devours it. This irks Mr. Saint a little bit. We've kind of all been there. It's a normal social interaction. These social niceties happen all the time. Curb Your Enthusiasm is a television show based on these very moments. This is normal. Now let's assume this happens every week. And in fact, let's just say 100 times in a row it does. Would it shock you if I were to say that Mr. Saint resented Mr. Animal, came to dislike him, came to find him distasteful, impolite, a brute, kind of a jackass, a fucker? I hate that fucking guy. Doesn't he fucking know he's not supposed to just accept it every single time? This interaction doesn't make the saint want revenge, not directly. This is more complicated than he's good and I'm bad because of some silly ethical argument. Let's go back to how our saint considered our hungry friend. His anger isn't really at the friend. Not really. It's at his inability of his friend to restrain himself. If his friend was just as polite, doesn't he know I'm hungry? I'm offering it to be polite. Why doesn't he turn it down to be polite? You tend to see this type of interaction a lot more often, a lot more frustration here. Don't you know this is how you're supposed to be? Don't you know you should be able to withhold that base animal instinct? Don't you know this ascetic ideal? The saint is considering his own restraint here. It's part of what he's learned about how the world should be. There's a reason he doesn't just take the slice of pizza. And in fact, that's really what he's frustrated with, because he withheld from doing so, going as far as to offer the slice of pizza to someone else. This interaction is complicated. Now, what's happening here is a lot more. Deleuze refers to this as the topology of ressentiment, and there's a reason for that. This is not an interplay of symbols. This isn't an interplay of ideas. This is not any of that. This is about the core forces, the forces within, the forces of desire that the saint and the animal are having to deal with. They exist within you, and they're forces of acting and reacting and not acting. We could say inaction, non-action, non-acting. They're impotent. Impotizing is not a word, but we're going to start using it here. This is the fiction of a force separated from what it does. The process of accusation in Ressentiment fulfills this task. Reactive forces project an abstract and neutralized image of force. Such a force, separated from its effects, will be blameworthy if it acts, deserving, on the contrary, if it does not. Moreover, it is thought that more abstract force is needed to hold back than is needed to act. Here we get to the brunt of where Ressentiment really kind of comes together. The mistakes and bullshit underneath the surface level that give birth to this weird interplay of forces. Deleuze uses the term paralogism here. You're going to hear me do that too. I think it's appropriate. These aren't just mistakes that someone's making. There's a bit more. Mistakes are contingent. Mistakes are happenstance. A paralogism is a mistaken reasoning that's based off of faulty premises. So the idea of the foundation's broken and you work with it anyway, this is the paralogism. You may not have noticed the paralogism above. It's okay. Most people don't. When I said that you can separate the force from the thing it does, that is the paralogism. This is actually not possible. This is the faulty reasoning at its base. Take a second to think about it. We can't actually do this, can we? Separating force from its own action. We do this, and STEM lords do this, and science teachers do this, and physicists do this in conversation, where we say something like, oh, the force pushed the block. Force is the effect and the cause. We can't really break these things apart. When we say electricity powers your TV, it doesn't. It doesn't work that way. Gravity doesn't pull you to Earth. Momentum doesn't keep a ball moving. We speak of it like this because it's easier for us to discuss things like that. At least we think so. But when we do this, we sort of neuter the force. Our friend the saint, he wanted that pizza, right? You know, the slice he gave to someone else. He might have taken it. He could have, but he chose not to. But this is bullshit. I mean, he didn't take the pizza. He offered it to someone else. He has a billion justifications in there, reasons, logical interventions inside of himself, whatever it is. But this would be like a TV saying that it had the power to turn itself on, but it didn't. It's like a bowling ball in a bag, prideful of not actively knocking down any pins. It's in a fucking bag. Can't knock down any pins. It's not being rolled at them. That ball, that TV, our friend the saint tells himself this. He separates his force. He separates desire, his passions, from the action they are a part of. This lets our friend toss these parts wherever he wants. And that includes at his friend, the pizza-eating bastard here. That guy, he wasn't simply hungry, so he ate his pizza. No. The force and the act, they're not the same thing. He chose to act on eating that pizza, knowing he could have done otherwise. What a dickhead. Who wants to be friends with someone like that? What an asshole. I don't need people like that in my fucking life. I need people who treat people better. I need better people in my life. Fuck that guy. And we've landed. This is Ressentiment in full force. This is the setup. The saint resents the animal for his lack of control. A self-control the saint proudly exhibits. Did he? Because I'd argue he didn't. Deleuze would argue he didn't. Nietzsche too. If he wanted that slice of pizza, he'd have taken the fucking slice of pizza. Force can't be split apart. It doesn't work to argue that the other way either. Force still can't be split apart. Force and effect aren't broken, but we act like they are. We talk about it. The actual operation here is simply more insidious than that. Let's go all the way back to the start. All the way. One force. Again, the emotional interactions to this ever-growing memory ball. And the other, the immediate reactions to the world. Now let's take a second, because you'll notice I didn't say you really. I'm talking about two forces. You aren't really here. Neither is the saint, to be frank. Not a lot of it, anyway. It's a couple of processes colliding and working together. Memory shit gets brought front and center. Now, someone's reacting to memories alongside what they're seeing. Memories are fucked up like that. We remember the effect. You don't really remember the force, because remember, we've divorced that already, so you really wouldn't. But at best, you remember the car hitting someone, but you don't remember the force of it. What the causation, the idea of that, you don't talk about. You just remember the thing, the event as you've drawn, as we've separated. So we perceive force and we act to separate it. We see the effect, we presume causes, this cycle. Through this mistake, this paralogism, where he believes that force and act aren't the same thing. There's a miracle. There's a creation here, a miraculation, you could say. After all, once we have the ability to shift around forces as we see and their effects, well, we come front and center. The saint sees himself as a decider, a chooser, puts himself there. Obviously, something stopped it. Obviously, something separated the force out. Obviously, something made the choice not to eat the last slice of pizza. Now, don't let this story fill you with this reactionary zeal for the world and zest for everything that's happening. No, don't say to yourself, oh, of course, he should have gone for the pizza. An Ubermensch would go for what he wanted. You're doing the thing. You're separating force from effect. You're doing it in your own particular way now on the other side of things. And you're doing it for a character in a story I fucking made up that doesn't exist, that doesn't have anything behind it. And you're adding in all of these things. You've separated force from effect. Do you think the social realities and oddness and the interactions inside of that friend group and in his entire life that made the saint make his choice and do what he did by not eating the last slice of pizza, offering it to someone else and then being upset, do you think the world that created him didn't create a guy who automatically just eats it? And do you think he ate it because he wanted to purely, that he was hungry? You think he is an Ubermensch? These are effects. These are story moments. These are not part of the forces. We do not get to judge those in other people. You don't get to judge those in fucking stories that someone's telling. And you do. You all do. I've done it. We do it at fucking movies. We do it in stories. We do it in philosophy. We do it in YouTube videos. You'll assign effect without knowing the forces, thinking that they're somehow divorced. And this is what Nietzsche referred to as the slave mentality. You're doing that. There's only one medicine for it. Ressentiment's really difficult to get rid of, because one of the fun things about ressentiment is it builds itself. If you remember and you feel slighted by things you remember, the 100 times someone took your fucking slice of pizza when you offered it, the ways that when you got home, your partner didn't call out or give you a hug, the ways that in class, teacher didn't call on you right away or gave you the wrong grade again, didn't recognize you the way you like. These things we like to remember because ressentiment wants more of it. Once we've brought memories to the forefront, we want more of them. It's one of the curses of our age. No, there's only one balm for that curse. It's not fun either. It's one that's kind of scary, actually, if you live today. Forget. Forgetting is the balm. Fuck memory. We tend to think of forgetting as a detriment, a negative, as if memories themselves were what make us up. Think about all the horrors and hand-wringing and nightmares that we talk about when we discuss losing memories. Think of the existential horrors that we've written, films and books. It's wild. We take memory seriously for ourselves, and we presume memory in others. For the saint, you could say, the days the animal ate their last slice of pizza was the most important days of their life. But for the animal, well,
It was Tuesday.
I'd like to end this myself, but I don't want to pretend to. Nietzsche easily said it better than I think even Deleuze ever put into words. Certainly better than me. So before I end, I want to say thank you for watching. Drop a comment, drop a like. Please join us if you want at DGQC on discord.gg/DGQC, Patreon/DGQC, or ultimately anywhere you like. Had to get it in there, before I forgot. Forgetfulness is not merely a force of inertia, as superficial people think. It is much rather an active capability to repress something positive in the strongest sense, to which we can ascribe the fact that while we are digesting what we alone live through and experience and absorb into ourselves, we could call the process mental ingestion, we are conscious of what is going on as little as we are with the entire thousandfold process which our bodily nourishment goes through. The doors and windows of consciousness are shut temporarily. They remain undisturbed by the noise and struggle with which the underworld of our functional organs keeps working for and against one another. A little stillness, a little tabula rasa of the consciousness, so that there will again be room for something new. Above all, for the nobler functions and officials, for ruling, thinking ahead, determining what to do. For our organism is arranged in an oligarchy. That is, as I said, the use of active forgetfulness, a porter at the door, so to speak, a custodian of psychic order, quiet, etiquette. From that, we can see at once how, if forgetfulness were not present, there could be no happiness, no cheerfulness, no hoping, no pride, no present. The man in whom this repression apparatus is harmed and not working properly, we can compare to a dyspeptic, and not just compare. He is finished with nothing.